Welcome to the Phoenix Prosperity Podcast, where wealth meets legacy. Join your host, Tim Fergestad, as we explore the journeys of Phoenix's finest to success and beyond.
Hello, this is Tim Fergestad. Thank you for joining us. I'm very pleased to have Michael Duchemin with me here today. With broad training in the arts, humanities, and social sciences, Dr. Duchemin has worked since 1984 as president and CEO, executive director, chief curator, project manager, exhibition and program developer, historian, and author, specializing in the cultural and intellectual history of the United States with an emphasis on the American West. Awesome. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you so much, Tim. Glad to be here.
This is all something I love this stuff, so I'm super excited for this interview. Can you give the listeners a background on how you got into the American West as your specialty?
Yeah, sure. I'm from Wisconsin originally. I grew up in a suburb outside of Milwaukee, and in 1984, I decided to come to Arizona State University and do my master's training there in a new field at that time. I was in I think it was the third class at the university in a new topic called public history. Now or applied history. And what that means is training historians to work in non-academic settings. And my track was really to work in business, and companies like Coca-Cola, Wells Fargo, Budweiser, companies that use their history as part of their marketing in particular, were the types of businesses that I was looking to become part of. And so in that new program, I got excellent training. Our professor, who's since passed away, his name was Noel Stowe, but he's one of the best professors ever at Arizona State University. And then quickly, my first, I have a great story to tell, but it's too long for your format. But how I got my first job is a really great story. But it ended up being with the A.J. Bayless markets. You might not have been in the Valley long enough to remember the Bayless markets, but they were rivals to the Basha markets statewide. Okay. They ran 46 stores statewide back in the day. It really got started in the teens and 20s, and then got into the supermarket format in the 50s and grew large. The AJ stores that you see around are a remnant. AJ stands for AJ and AJ Bayless, but the Bayless markets themselves are gone. They were bought out by the Southland Corporation, which runs the 7-Eleven stores across the country, a Texas firm. And anyway, my first job was as manager of store number 1, which was at Central Avenue and Indian School. It was a J.B. Bayless Old Country Store Museum. And a lot of your listeners, probably maybe 60 years old and older, probably remember that, because everybody went there on their 3rd or 4th grade school field trip. Yeah. We did 40,000 kids a year through that museum back in the 1980s. Wow. And it continued, it ended really in the late 80s. But I got my start there, and then, jumping ahead, I helped to parlay that collection into the Arizona Historical Society, which was building a new regional history center. It's located in Papago Park off of 68th Street and Curry Road over in that area, kind of over the hill from the Desert Botanical Gardens. And it was really designed to look at 20th century Arizona history, and the Bayless collection became the foundational collection for the exhibits in that space. So I started in the museum business there in the 1984 to 1993, and then got an opportunity to go to Los Angeles in 93 to work with the Autry Museum of the American West. And so I took that opportunity, and then most of my career was in LA. The last 12, 15 years, I've been jumping around to Montana and Texas, working as a president for different museums. And then recently resigned that post and started an independent company in the art business, and decided to relocate back to Phoenix to be close to the Scottsdale art market, which is part of a larger market for Western American fine art, with Santa Fe and Jackson Hole being the other key hubs.
Really? Okay. That was my next question.
Yeah,
Okay, but
I'd be
apparently
happy to
Santa.
talk a little bit about that if you would like.
Sure, sure. Well, you mentioned this 20th century stuff here, and then the Gene Autry, was that really cowboy oriented? I mean, how much of this is different phases of Arizona's history? Can you
Sure.
speak a little bit to the focus of the different places you were at?
Right. Well, the Arizona Historical Society, of course, was all about Arizona history, and we really, in Phoenix, focused on the 20th century because the main museum, the headquarter museum in Tucson, really captured the 19th century and the 18th century and the earlier history in
Okay,
southern Arizona. And then there was a third division in Flagstaff, which really was more of a regional focus. And then also in Yuma, also a regional focus. So there were four divisions back in
okay,
those days. I think there might still be today, but I'm not sure anymore, to be honest. And anyway, because the Phoenix market was so big, the museum here, even though it didn't have the history, rivaled the headquarter museum. But they wanted to make sure, subject matter wise, that there wasn't a duplication, that it was
sure.
focusing on something different. And
Okay,
Phoenix, by and large, was a post-war city. I mean, not exclusively, but Salt River Project, I mean, is the critical piece, and uh, Arizona, is it Arizona Public Service, APS? You know, those companies were really critical in providing water and power. But the unification of all the canals on the north side of the river was the Arizona Improvement Company. That was my master's thesis at Arizona State, and that ultimately becomes Salt River Project. The
huh.
unification took place in the 1890s, and then Salt River Project comes along later. But that was the core of my historical research and the basis of the exhibits and the programs and things that I was creating for the Arizona Historical Society back in those days.
Okay, that's a great point. Yeah, this couldn't have happened in the desert without that.
Yeah, and the water is key, you know, and it still is key. And of course, those projects have gone on with tapping Colorado River water and other things since Salt River Project. But Roosevelt Dam and the Canyon Lake and all those other lakes are really
Mhm.
critical to
Right.
us being able to live here.
Right. Can you speak to well the other highlights besides the founding stuff around the early, or little over 100 years ago, maybe, but sort of like you said, the post-war development of Phoenix.
Sky Harbor Airport, of course, is a critical piece, and the fact that it's located centrally within the city, I think, is really a brilliant maneuver because you can get to the airport in 10 or 15 minutes from most places in the valley. I mean, if you're up in North Scottsdale, it's a little bit longer, but that's a key piece. Most of the development, though, took place in the railroad era, and it's really was laid out around the train system as one of the major stops on the Southern Pacific Line, and then the highway system, the freeway system, and whether you like it or not, it's modeled after the freeway system in Los Angeles with a series of loops that allow you to
Right.
have more than one route to get different places, which is the beauty of it. And then, of course, huge amount of congestion and traffic, which is the downside always with just so many people having moved here. I think there's 5 million people in the metro area now,
Right.
which is mind blowing compared to where we were, 30 years ago when I first moved there.
Right. We were talking before the show too about the sprawly nature of open desert, right?
Yeah.
And how that's delayed the sort of redevelopment of downtown, which is happening quite well in some spots.
Yeah, I when I came back, I made a conscious effort to move downtown. I live in the Midtown area off of Executive Towers. It's an old mid-century modern high-rise built in 1964. It's on the National Register. It's on 207 West Clarendon, so right off of Central Avenue near
Okay.
City Square. And it's a great building and really a great community. It's a condo building. But I made a point to move there in part because I travel a lot and the building operates like a hotel. It's got a 24/7 concierge and
Okay.
it's a lock and leave place where if I'm gone for a few weeks or if I'm gone for the summer, there's always somebody there. They'll come in and dust and run the water and do everything for me. So
Nice.
you can't find that in every complex, and it just has just a look and feel that's different than a lot of places. Now it's a different type of resort living. It's not like the resorts in Scottsdale and that sort of thing, but it harkens back to a period, 50 years ago or 60 years ago, where a different vibe in Phoenix, and that what was modern at that time. And
Sure.
that's something that appeals to me architecturally.
Sure, sure. Okay, let's back up with some more again. Can
Sure.
you talk a little bit about the highlights of the Autry and the Montana and the San
Yeah.
Antonio, your different sort of stints in those places?
Yeah, so the work that I did to develop the exhibition design for the Arizona Historical Society, which was on a statewide basis, a lot of it looked at race and ethnicity and religion as foundations for community formation and development. So when I went to the Autry Museum, I took those same concepts and I applied them in the Western United States as a whole
Right.
versus just in Arizona. And I used the 1890 census, which in American history is considered a critical moment in our development as a nation. There's a Frederick Jackson Turner wrote a famous treatise called the Turner Frontier Thesis. In 1890, he argued that the frontier had closed and there was no longer a contiguous frontier border. And so we were now moving into a new era since 1890, that at the Autry, we defined it as convergence, where there were cultures and people coming from every direction descending on the West. Canadian immigrants coming south, Chinese immigrants coming east, American migrants coming west, Mexican immigrants coming north, and many, many other groups too. And so they were all converging on this region, and it was beginning to infill and develop its own nature and its own culture. So I created, at a county level, I went through and I looked at every county west of the Mississippi River, and I looked at what was the composition of the population in each county in terms of race and ethnicity and religion, to the
That
degree
sounds
that
like a lot of work. There's a lot of counties.
it was a lot of counties. It was a lot of work. I've developed a methodology for it that made it go rather quickly. Um, and then I created a really great, the exhibit is still there. If you make it to Los Angeles, you can see it. It's called the Community Gallery, or Spirit of Community. It was named originally. And after all this time, I mean, this exhibit opened in 1994. So I thought,
Okay.
for sure it would never last 30 years. The design on these exhibitions, on a permanent exhibition, is meant to last 12 to 15 years.
Huh.
So this thing is way past its due. But the beauty of it is that it really captured something that is critical to people's understanding of their own sense of community. And it was, at the time, it was a little bit revolutionary because it was highly representative of diverse populations.
Right.
There were Native American, African American, Canadian, Latter-day Saint, European immigrants, Mexican citizens and immigrants. Asian was primarily, it was 99% Chinese at that time, with a very small Japanese population. And then it's hard to take the time to explain the whole design, but in the design, I created this large case that kind of pushed up against all the other exhibit cases in the space. And I put the American, what we would call the dominant culture, the white Americans who moved west as part of a large migration, in that center case, because they really had all the power and the control. And for all these other groups, these other immigrant groups, their view of each other was always filtered through the dominant culture. So we were able
Right.
to build that into the design of the space. And I think that's one of the reasons it's lasted so long, because it has an excellent design. And to really understand how the dominant culture influences all the other cultures. And the model basically is that we still live in a segregated space. Then, more than now, perhaps, but our spaces are still segregated, and people choose to live with people who are like them. If
Mhm.
you're Jewish, you want to live in close proximity to the synagogue. If you're, Korean or any other culture, you're going to find a community where the schools, the banks, the churches, all those things are located. And so you have pockets of of ethnic and racial identity that just naturally form in areas. You have other cosmopolitan areas too, but these are true. This is true in Phoenix today, and it's true in every other city. So we're forced to live together in close proximity to each other in an urban area. And in Arizona and in the desert, you have to have water and you have to have power, and you need centralized living in order to be able to have those things. But yet within that space, that urban space, we are then segregated, or we self-segregate into all of our various, whatever our makeup is.
Right,
And that could be people from the Midwest or from Minnesota. You
right.
get together at the county fair every year and drink as much beer as you can.
Sure, lefse. Right. Okay, well, that sounds super impressive, and that's got to be one of your biggest prides and joys, is having built something and to have it still there is extra impressive.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's lasted all this long. It was really my first, the work that I did for it, came up. I was able to put it together in a year because of all the front end work I'd done with Arizona history, with Arizona Historical Society. And I just took that model and then I applied it, to a region rather than a state. And it worked very, very well. And so within a year, I was able to. The other thing that helped is the Autry Museum had a huge amount of resources. Gene Autry was alive in those days.
Okay.
And he never said no to anything that I wanted to do. And so I was able to get the resources that I needed. I was able to get loans. I was able to buy new collections for the museum. Western history in general, organizes around cowboys, Indians, wildlife, landscape, Hispanic topics and subjects. Those are really the primary pillars, you would call them, in Western art and in Western history too. But there's all these nuances, and there's all these, like urbanization, for example, and other things that kind of play into those factors. And the Autry Museum was open to exploring everything then and now.
Okay. When you mentioned the singing cowboy, I think of music too. I always want to.
Well, I actually ended up writing my dissertation at University of Nevada on Gene Autry. It's called New Deal Cowboy, and it's called Gene Autry and Public Diplomacy. And it really looks at Gene's role during the Roosevelt administration as a propagandist with the New Deal and the Good Neighbor policy and the build up to World War II. But what I discovered in doing that work is that Gene Autry is one of the most important figures, and he had a big presence in Arizona too. He did his military service here, for one thing, at is it Luke Field? Yeah. But Gene Autry is, this is the easiest way to say it. He is the only entertainer that has 5 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. No one else has come close. And Gene, during his career in the 30s and 40s and into the early 50s, he was in the top 10 as a live performance person, as a radio broadcaster, as a television broadcaster, as a motion picture movie star, and doing sound recordings as a recording artist. And so, and especially in the 30s and 40s, he was in the top 10 in all those fields, except for television, at the same time. And it's called transmedia storytelling. It's multi-platform entertainment. It's a lot of things that we talk about today, platforming and all these types of things. Well, Autry really invented a lot of that, or he was the first person to be able to work in multi-platform, back in the 1930s, and when it wasn't even defined as a characteristic. The challenge for me was at the Autry Museum is that they didn't want to tell Gene's story there, and they still don't. Because Gene never wanted it to be a vanity museum. He never wanted it to be about him. And this is one of the reasons ultimately why, my fit there wasn't so good, is because you can't tell the story of the 20th century American West, or really even 20th century America, without making Gene Autry prominent. And if you're not going to put him in the story, then the story is incomplete. And I fought with management about that issue, and a few other ones, but that was a key one. They just didn't want to tell his story. And I thought it was a crying shame not to tell his story. And so I went on to do other things that and took a different turn in my career. I went from doing curatorial work and exhibits to becoming an executive director, and then ultimately a president and CEO.
Okay. Was Montana and Texas, were those still pretty, what's the word? Creative for you? Were you able to?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
More of a focus. I left the Autry during the Great Recession in 2008. They offered me a buyout.
Okay.
I took it, and I started my own
So that was
company.
after he had passed.
What's that? Yeah, it was after he had passed, and things were changing. We had in 2003 with the Autry, we had done mergers. I was the chief curator for this, and I'm very proud of it. But we acquired the Southwest Museum of the American Indian. We acquired the Women of the West Museum from Boulder and Denver, Colorado. We did a long-term 40-year loan agreement with the California Historical Society to truly save the California Historical Society. All those three things happened in the summer of 2003.
Okay.
And as a result, the Gene Autry Western Heritage Museum became the Autry National Center of the American West.
Wow.
And it took on a much bigger presence and a much bigger profile. And it was on its way to being, truly a national museum. But the local yahoos in LA really, people with some power and influence really objected to the whole notion, and they framed it as the cowboys taking over the Indians. And they made it into something that it really wasn't. The Autry Museum, because it had money, was truly saving all these other collections. The Southwest Museum of the American Indian would have been broken up and sold off. They couldn't make payroll, and it was going to be the end of the museum if somebody didn't step in. And the Autry Museum stepped in, and this led to my demise there, really, because the Southwest Museum had 1 million objects in the collection, but it was in terrible condition, and it hadn't been cared. I mean, it started in 1915, and it hadn't been cared for forever. Wow. We're talking about, this was 2003 to 2005.
Right, like 100 years.
And what, I equated it to the reunification of Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall, because when East Germany and West Germany got back together, East Germany was so poor and impoverished, having been under the Soviet influence.
It's an interesting analogy, but I get it. Yeah, that works.
Yeah. Well, they were taking $1 million a year out of my budget and putting it into the conservation budget for the Southwest Museum in order to build up that museum and build up that collection. But it really cramped my style, because I couldn't do the projects I had done for, 10 years previously to that. And I agreed with the concept of it, but in the application of it,
the execution didn't.
I just kept getting, I felt like it was too much, and I didn't like the consequences of it. And so I decided to really kind of jump out, and I went back to school in my 40s and got my doctorate, paid for it myself. Took me about 2 years to do it. But when I came out, my salary doubled and tripled, very quickly. So I don't know, it cost me 50, 60 grand to get the degree, and I made that back in my first contract. So it was a big move, but I moved from being, a worker, a curator to management, into an executive director position. And then,
but you still got to wear a creative hat.
Well, this was the key thing. I went from a museum with over 200 employees, a big museum, $17 to $20 million budget, and I decided to work in medium-sized museums, 30 to 40 employees, $5 to $6 million budget, because at that level I could still have a creative hand. I could still it was small enough where I could control everything,
right,
and and direct where the curators were going without having to do all the work myself. And so the only way that, and as the bigger you get in any business, the farther away you get from the actual core activity, right? And at the highest level in any company, it's really about fundraising or securing the funds for the next project and dealing with HR issues, and some marketing and some media related types of things to, get with messaging. So, your core expertise, you don't get to use it. The bigger you get, the farther away you get from whatever business it is that you're in.
Right.
And I think that's true across the board. You just start managing people or money or, or dealing with problems. So that's why I chose smaller institutions, and had quite success with the Charles M. Russell Museum in Great Falls, Montana. They were kind of a mess when I got there, and I was able to. It's a long story at how messed up they were, but I was able to get them back on track. I spent 4 years there, really turning it around and giving it some legs. And then they brought in a board of directors that I really didn't want to work with or knew I couldn't work with. So my contract came up for renewal there, and I chose not to renew it, and they chose not to renew me. And I jumped from there down to San Antonio, Texas, to the Briscoe Museum of Western Art. Same thing there. They had spent, 10, 15 years building a museum and getting a beautiful facility open. And then they got it open and they got stuck in the mud, and they weren't going anywhere. It was just, it needed to be engaged. And so I came in and operationally made it work. And I spent 7 years there, left there in September of 2023. And the main transition I think that you're seeing there is I moved from worker to management. And I also moved from kind of broad Western history, art, and popular culture into more art-focused institutions. And I did that for a couple of reasons. It was a particular interest of mine to focus on the art. In every museum previously, that's where all the money was. The people who have money collect art. And so they were always interested in that aspect of the operation, especially at the Autry Museum, but every place else too. And art has a truly magical quality to it. If you have art, you know what I'm talking about, because once you have it, you can't live without it. If you don't, you really don't get it, because it's not part of your DNA or it's not part of your lifestyle. But if you collect art, it becomes a fever, right? And you're always chasing the next piece, and you can't live without it. And your culling collections and your buy sell trade and all of that. So that's what I focus on now. I'm an art advisor. I have clients who are both collectors and artists who are looking at shaping their careers. And then I'm also a qualified art appraiser, so that I can do appraisals to create valuation for insurance or donation estates. Okay. And then I'm also an art broker, where I do some of the buy sell trade with some of my clients who they want to sell some of these, so they have money to buy other art. So work on some of those areas. And then I also consult with smaller museums, both in operations and then creating exhibitions and doing curatorial work for them. So my day is different every day. I have 17 projects in my book, and I just, what am I going to work on today? And, advance the ball a little bit on each one of these things.
Awesome. That sounds very rewarding, very cool. You get to play and still wear different hats, and
it keeps me active in a community. There's a strong art community out there, and it keeps me active in that community. And it's my passion. So my business is my hobby, so to speak.
Right.
Some people describe it as a retirement job. It doesn't feel that way to me. It just feels like I took a pivot, and I went from having built something up in several institutions to be as good as it could be, and then started out, and now I'm building a new business and a new company. But I'm not trying to get big. I don't really want a bunch of employees, and I don't want to create a giant operation. What I really want to do is stay small and stay nimble, but improve my client base, where I have the highest quality clients and the best collections. But I don't.
You can be picky now with your experience. That's kind of what I do in my investment world, right? I want to be picky, right, with the deals I do and stuff. Exactly.
Yeah, I'm trying to get there, and I located in Phoenix because there's 3 hubs: Scottsdale, Santa Fe, and Jackson Hole, Wyoming are the 3 hubs for Western art, and you can kind of triangulate those 3 communities, and then there's tertiary markets that build off of those 3. Of course, New York is the main art market in the country and in the world, and so New York is always important as well. But to operate, you have to be close to one of those 3 hubs. and I have roots in Arizona, and so I decided to come back to this
Sure.
area. The area in Paradise Valley has more Western art collectors per capita probably than any place else in the country. And a
Nice.
lot of those collectors started, some of them even before the 80s, but a lot of them started in the 1980s. They've built
Okay.
huge collections, and now they're reaching that legacy moment where people are passing away.
Right.
They're deciding what to do with their estate. They have big collections that need, something has to happen. So I'm there to help with appraisals. I'm there to help with, if a spouse has passed away, to make decisions about what to do with the collection, and
Right.
and then to help facilitate whatever the choice is to be done, to help see that it gets done correctly and with compassion.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I'm 2 years into it. I've made my nut for 2 years now, so I feel
Okay.
good. And I'm, working 10 to 20 hours a week, so I've got a lot of free time, and
Perfect.
I'm, I'm a happy camper.
Okay, excellent. So as we wrap things up, I want to talk about a little bit about the art and the nature of some of that. So I was talking to some buddies about cars, right? And how um, a lot of the antique cars, 50s and 60s cars and stuff, the people who really cherish those things are moving on and wondering art, in my understanding, goes in cycles,
Yeah.
right? And phases. So, what's sort of the phase for Western stuff? I go to some places around here. There's some beautiful ranches and hotels and restaurants. They have really cool collections, and I love it. But I just don't know if things get hot in different times. Can you speak a little bit to how that affects the markets? And is it regional or is it just cultural, bigger
Right.
picture?
Well, the big picture I'll say is that I've investigated this back to the 1890s, and each
Okay.
generation, every time it was a Chicken Little scenario where people would say the sky is falling, run for the hills, it's all
Hmm.
over, the gig is up. And
Right.
each time Western art collecting has managed to survive into the next generation. So we're in a transition now, as a lot of these collectors that started in the 1980s are now in their 70s or 80s or 90s themselves.
Hmm.
Some of them, small percentage, maybe 10%, have what I'd call legacy collectors. Their children or their grandchildren or nieces and nephews have picked up the bug, and they're
Okay.
going to maintain the collections. Oftentimes, the collection is what is called what we say return to the market,
Hmm.
where a spouse might die, usually the man, and his widow would decide, I'm just going to sell the collection and return it back to the market so that
Right. It can be appreciated
it can
by
be
all the new
recycled and
people. Yeah.
repurchased by new audiences. I will say that I've tracked the two biggest auctions in the country are the Coeur d'Alene Art Auction in Reno, Nevada in July, and the Scottsdale Art Auction here in Scottsdale in April. And Scottsdale is a $10, $12 million auction and 1 day auction.
Okay.
Reno is more like a $15 to $20 million sale. And then there's many other smaller sales and shows, and there's a whole circuit of stuff. You can look at Western Art Collector magazine or Art of the West or Western Art and Architecture, and they'll run calendars that tell you where the events are. But there's a whole circuit, and people, artists and collectors and whatnot are moving on that circuit throughout the year from these different communities. Um, but there's historical deceased art when the artist is dead. That's one type, and that's the most expensive type. And then
Right.
there's contemporary work where the artists are living, and you get to meet the artist and have a proverbial
Very
beer
cool.
with them and all that sort of thing. And people usually fall into one collecting group or the other.
Hmm.
And then within the contemporary collectors, there's two types. There's the traditional artists who are keeping alive the Western art tradition, Cowboy Artists of America. Martin Greeley is a good example of an artist, really great artist in that group. And then there are what I would call the modern contemporary artists, which they were really inspired by the Institute of American Indian Arts out of Santa Fe. Both of these kind of in the 1960s, and they take modern abstraction, impressionism, modern techniques, and apply it to Western subjects and themes.
Okay.
So there's three kind of broad categorically historical and contemporary, and then contemporary breaks down into traditional and modern. And those are the main collecting areas that you'll find today. People do cross over. The market is as strong as it's ever been, in my opinion. This year in particular has been a really strong year nationwide. I thought it was going to be tough, and especially for the Scottsdale art auction, because those that tariff talk and the 20% drop in the market happened the week of the Scottsdale art auction.
Oh, really?
April. And I remember talking to the director about it, and it was like, we had no idea how it was going to go because it was a big
consumer
drop.
confidence and all that.
I'd pulled a lot of stuff off the table the day before I went to the sale, and I think a lot of other people did too. But what it turned out is that Western art collectors are a conservative bunch, and most of them were backing the president's policies. Most of them were benefiting from the president's policies, and they had no qualms whatsoever about what was happening in that larger external market. And so it was one of the best sales they've had in a long, long time.
Okay.
And it looked like it was going to be a disaster, and it turned out to be, the opposite. So you can't really, you really have to know your markets to be able to predict what's going on. And even sometimes when you do know the market, you don't know how the collectors are going to respond.
Do you think media like Yellowstone and some other shows lately has had a big influence on the?
Yeah, Taylor Sheridan's done a lot to bring in younger people. And there's one artist in particular. His name is Mark Maggiore. He lives in Scottsdale. He's doing a show called Far West that'll be in Austin in September.
Okay.
And he's kind of producing his own shows now, which is something that most artists would not try to take on. But Mark's an unusual guy. He has a lot of Hollywood and media and music and
cool.
a lot of entertainment backing.
Okay.
He's somebody that it would be worthwhile for your audiences to look up if they're interested. He sells his work almost exclusively on Instagram. And at the Legacy Gallery in Scottsdale, let's see, it was about 2 years ago now, he did a solo show there at about 22 pieces. Sold for $3.3 million.
Nice.
And he had pieces that went over 500,000. So for a contemporary artist, that's
impressive. That's
jackpot. And and he did so well with it, he decided to produce the next sale himself rather than going through a gallery because he wouldn't have to pay that percentage. Galleries 30, 40, 50%. So gallery wasn't happy with that, but Mark's, he's getting it done. So anyway, he's an artist like that have brought in a whole new generation, and he's friends with Taylor Sheridan and with Joe Rogan, and I think he's got 100,000 plus followers on Instagram, maybe a lot more than that now, and so you're getting younger people, back in the market, if you will. It was the baby boomers who really objected to Western art. We used the image of the cowboy as part of our foreign policy during the 60s and 70s, and then Clint Eastwood and the man with no name became the anti-hero with Eastwood. It's kind of John Wayne versus Clint Eastwood in the Western world, and but you get 2 or 3 or 4 generations removed from baby boomers now, and these kids have no idea about those debates from back around the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. That's ancient history, and then you have the appeal and the romance and the the deals that are part of Western culture. And so much of our world now, if you look at it, I mean, the crypto market is the Wild West. There's no doubt about that. There's no regulation. There's no rules. You can get away with just about anything. The art market is the Wild West. The art market is a giant industry, international, $60-70 billion global industry that has virtually no regulation. And so I'm actually working on a novel right now that's going to focus on the Old West around the Western art world, and the New West that looks at fintech and medtech and the emergence of crypto and AI, and how that's driving a lot of different industrial elements right now. And the fact that both of these things live in Phoenix as we are here now. The Old West and the New West are clashing, and one of my great desires is to bring a lot of that new money into the Western art market. And because they're buying Bentleys and $200,000 watches and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, if you're buying commodities, you should look at buying art because it's a good investment. It's a good place to put money. It's not always liquid. So you have to really, it's money that you don't need right away. But there's investment grade art out there. And if you collect the right artists, there's strong turnover. And you just have to know what to collect.
And so you can use retirement funds for that as well. It's the money that you don't need to have liquid.
Exactly. And then you can enjoy it. If you have let's say you have a $500,000 painting on your wall at home, you're not going to lose money when you get around to selling it. And you get the visual dividend of being able to enjoy it every day with your tea or your coffee in the morning or whatever it is. So absolutely. And you look at, very wealthy people with diverse portfolios, they have a percentage that they use for art. And they usually start small with maybe 5%. And then once they get the fever, I've got one guy I've been working with, he started, I'm going to do 200,000 this year. Right. And he's already spent 500,000 this year. So once he bought his first 6 or 7 pieces, it was like,
you got to complete the collection.
He's got to
catch them all.
Exactly. and it is, you're not, if you buy the right pieces, the right artist, the right pieces, you're not going to lose money on it. It's going to go up in value and you'll be able to enjoy it while you wait.
Right. I have a few that I couldn't afford at the time. I should have afforded because then when I could afford it, it had gone up like 20-fold or, it was things like that. So anyway, I have I enjoy it too.
So my wife what do you collect? Or can I ask you that?
Sure. My wife loves antiques in general. She collects all. She does a ton of stuff. I have Marcus Pearson here in I don't know. He's more. Do you know who I'm talking about? The Coyote series and some other ones like that. Yeah, we have some of those. And anyway, mostly paintings, mostly that sort of thing. My mom is an artist, and so I got exposed to all sorts of stuff early on. So I'm a big fan. Michael, as we wrap things up, I was wondering, event-wise, you mentioned maybe something coming up. Are there any events or anything, listeners? Because this will air probably in September, October-ish.
Sure.
Time. Is there any events you can share?
Well, there's the Far West show in Austin that's mid-September. Forget the exact date, but it might be the 14th. That is one to keep an eye out. And most of these you can participate online and bid remotely if you'd like. September 11th, I think it is, the Western Vision show at the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson Hole is a big event for wildlife artists. And that same weekend is the Jackson Hole Art Auction, which is one of the 3 major auctions of the year, also in Jackson Hole. And then a week later, September 20th in Cody, Wyoming, it's called Rendezvous Royale, and it's at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, and that's about a $2 million sale, mostly contemporary work, but some historical pieces.
Okay,
that's cool. That's the calendar for September. October is kind of a slow month. There's not too much happening in there, but September's loaded with the Eiteljorg Museum in Indianapolis. The first weekend in September has their annual Quest for the West, it's called. But there's some local magazines. Western Art Collector is one that's published in the Phoenix area, and there's calendars of events that you can find in there and on their website too. If any of your listeners are interested, you can go to the Western Art Collector website and you'll be able to get, what's happening and where it's happening. And it's a great circuit. It's lots of fun. If you join, you get to see the same people at a lot of different events across the country. It's kind of like a moving circus.
Okay, excellent. All right, Michael, if people would like to connect with you or learn more, what can they do? Where should they go?
I'm going to launch my website in October, but I can give you my email. Is that okay?
Sure, of course.
Yeah. So it's my last name, Duchemin888@gmail.com. And but I'll have a website up, soon enough, and maybe we can put a link to that if I can get it up in October. That's my plan.
Okay, awesome. Well, this has been great. Thank you, Michael. I love all this stuff.
All my business has been word of mouth for 2 years, so I haven't done any marketing at all.
Nice. That's a testament to the quality of the service and the knowledge.
Yeah, it's kind of my first piece. So I appreciate Ted, or Tim rather, you having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you everybody for listening and watching. Thank you, Michael Duchemin, for joining me today. A lot of great stuff, a lot of insights into industry that I enjoy a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks so much.
Inspired by our guests? Visit phoenixprosperitypodcast.com/guest and join us on the show and share your success story with Tim. The spotlight awaits.